Kate Neela, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's time for our Saturday book, and we are continuing from last weekend, Opus by Gareth Gore, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church. This is about the secretive group called Opus Dei, the work of God. And all I can say is this is a convoluted story. It's like a spider web, like a network. I can't summarize it easily. I recommend you listen to the whole thing from the beginning, from video number 1. Oh, this is video number 3. No, not 3. Sorry, my nails are wet. 3. It's mind-boggling, the level of corruption. And when we talk about white Christian nationalism, this is the Catholic version. So begun by a fascist, continued by wannabe oligarchical, capitalistic, empty shells. So, allegedly. So let's continue. Chapter 4. Nothing of This World, starting April of 1954. So if you've been following along, we've been talking about this Banco Popular in Spain, largest bank in Spain, more than 2,000 banks around the country, very influential and rotten to the core because it is a front for money laundering and theft, allegedly, by Opus Dei, and they infiltrated from the beginning. We talked about, I can't remember if we're going to talk about it or we already have. I've been reading along, but it's mind-boggling. So in April of 1954, they had their annual meeting, and there were 2 new people at this meeting who would make the bank a secret weapon to reshape the church and impact thousands of people globally. It's really remarkable. It's breathtaking what they were able to do. Both Opus Dei supernumeraries, these 2 guys, were troops in Escriva's army. At the meeting, they came as a secret weapon for Opus Dei. Opus Dei got wind of the scandal with the chairman of the bank, Felix Millet. Now, some of these stories are really convoluted, and in the interests of time, and because it takes so long to parse them and then synopsize them, I do gloss over some of these corruption stories, and I hope you'll get this book and read it. I would not have thought that a book written by a financial journalist would be so interesting, because I'm not a financial person. It holds no interest for me. This is just remarkable. So the scandal was that this Millet guy had made a deal that would cause trouble with Franco. And this is what an Opus Dei member told everybody at the headquarters. Franco was their patron, but also they had to tread very carefully. This was a plan to profit and advantage Opus Dei that they were working on. Basically, they staged a coup. They got rid of Millet. They put an Opus Dei guy in his place in charge of day-to-day operations of the bank. And at the end of 3 years, Opus Dei had 100% control of the daily operating of the bank. So they used the fact that this guy was up to no good for them to be up to no good. And this was part of a much larger plot on the part of Opus Dei to infiltrate the Spanish business world with the bank as their hub and their source of money, fooling money people into giving money to the bank. And then because the bank was salted with Opus Dei members in every department, getting essentially illicit, looking like through the normal methods of borrowing money and getting mortgages and business support and that kind of thing. Really, it was all illicit, and that money was whisked away. The earlier college recruits were in careers now. They had started out recruiting at universities because they figured they would get people, young people they could mold in these residence halls that they set up. Unbeknownst to a number of people, they'd stay in these homes and they'd soon get brainwashed. The young people did go into professions. They became lawyers, they became doctors, they became financiers. They became entrepreneurs and opened very successful businesses. But now they were all members of Opus Dei. What was one of the rules? They had to give their money to Opus Dei, money that they earned. So this gave Opus Dei all this extra cash to expand. Anybody who had money, who became a member, was pressed to give up their money. So a group of these Opus Dei guys set up new companies to get contracts, to get money, to give to Opus Dei. And these companies that were drawn in by virtue of their owners, their board members being members of Opus Dei, these were called support companies. This had been a plan of Escriva's since the 40s. I am blown away by how Machiavellian this guy was, how successful he was at it. I won't tell you what happens towards the end. It's going to blow your mind. By the 1950s, they had many businesses and many companies that were owned personally by big, important members of Opus Dei. And they were able to distance the money that Opus Dei itself got its hands on by this network of associated support businesses. I guess that's money laundering. I mean, I don't know what else to call it. It's like dark money. This limited Opus Dei's liability, because if they got audited, it didn't look like much, because the money was in these other businesses being controlled by members, but that wasn't in the books of Opus Dei. That's the best I can describe it. These companies were guided by Opus Dei. They had a business department within Opus Dei whose real purpose was really just to handle all these member companies. They appointed Opus Dei members to the company boards to report back and to bring orders from Opus Dei to the businesses. So satellite businesses. And they told these private companies how to run. They formed a holding company. It had a big, long Spanish name, but it was known as Espina. And it was headed at the top by two numeraries of Opus Dei, Alberto Ullastres and Luis Valls Tabarera. And we're going to know about Luis. I'm just going to call him Luis. These names are a mouthful. And the board was a whole board of Opus Dei, a who's who of Opus Dei elite for Espina. This is like the head spider. So this Opus Dei was turning into a business conglomerate, even including New York. They had connections to a lawyer to the stars. This is his nickname, Saul Rosenblatt. He was Opus Dei. He was in Life magazine because he was shot at 3 times, and they did a big article about him. He was shot at because of a lawsuit with J.P. Morgan's granddaughter's family. So J.P. Morgan's granddaughter died and left him all of her fortune. And the other family members sued him because they said he had undue influence. He manipulated her into leaving him money. He was a really important person for the Opus Dei that was established in the U.S. He was able to get them mortgages near Harvard so they could set up residence hall. He was able to get them into the insurance business, and this is what they would do incrementally: lure people in and then use them. Luis, remember Luis? He got top priority. He was controlling the bank. He was happy to depose Millet. Remember Felix Millet, big scandal? Happy to depose him for Opus Dei, even though Millet was Luis's mother's cousin. So he's a family member. He would betray his family for Opus Dei. Luis orchestrated this Machiavellian ouster and takeover. And I know I didn't really get into describing it. It is Machiavellian is too kind a term for it. It is just, you wonder how people's minds can work in such a convoluted way to betray other people, but he did. Escrivá rewarded him. He was only 28, and he became the elector. He was set on the governing council of Opus Dei and had a vote on all major changes, especially who would succeed Escrivá. Luis had a friend named Navarro Rubio, and he was the chief executive. So now Opus Dei had control of the bank. A few weeks later, Rubio got a big government job. He got, put on Opus Dei, and then very shortly after that, he got a big government job with Franco, and he was like, oh, how do I decide? And they said, it's okay. You can keep your bank job, work with the government. It's perfect. Opus Dei had to get the majority shares of the bank to make sure that they retained full control. Now, when I say they were 100% in charge of the bank, they had people on the board, people at the top, people everywhere. But now they needed to control the shareholders. They found the shareholders that were in money trouble and offered quietly behind the scenes to buy out their shares. And they did it through a support company that belonged to Opus Dei. They put more Opus Dei members on the board of the bank. They okayed loans to Opus Dei companies who bought more shares of the board. And through that kind of roundabout way, the bank paid for its own hostile takeover. I'm not sure I'd be able to figure this out. I could barely understand it when it's written down in front of me. By January of 1957, they owned the majority of the shares. Luis was made the right-hand man of the new chief executive. So now he was not just in charge of the day-to-day. He was kind of the vice president. I don't think he had that title, but kind of like that. In 1 year, the bank went from the control in the hands of the control of experienced, respected, established bankers and financiers to a bunch of unknown Opus Dei members. The remaining few established board members' concerns were vocal and ignored. Then Opus Dei members got jobs with Franco, as Rubio had, and this emboldened them. They thought they had connections in the government. Rubio was now the Minister of Finance. Uyastes, who had been kind of a equal partner with Luis in Opus Dei, he became the Minister of Commerce. Lopez Rodo, that's his last name. He had a big, long name. He lived in the same residence as Luis. He was a good friend of his, and he was made special advisor to the prime minister. So the tentacles are getting higher and farther. Escrivá commended Luis's constant attention to the work of St. Nicholas. If you remember, St. Nicholas was his favorite saint because, excuse me, he gave presents to people. Santa Claus. There was a vast underground basilica that Escrivá had made by, no, I got that wrong. Not that he had made, that had been made by slave labor. 20,000 political prisoners. Franco had it made. Many had died. They attached a Benedictine abbey next door so the monks would be in constant vigil. And it included the tomb of a Falange guide, the founder, Jose Rivera. And he had modeled the phalange after the Nazis. He was a bullying thug, is how he was described. So Franco, not Escrivá, Franco had this underground basilica complex that was always being prayed at in honor of these paramilitary monsters. But it was a constant reminder of the combined power of Franco and the church. Franco liked to associate with the church to give him legitimacy. I mean, I think he actually was a believer, and he was very fascist. And the church loved the association with Franco. It gave him power. Franco wanted to go there and pay homage on the anniversary of Rivera's death, Rivera, the Phalange guy, to cement his relationship with over 1 million Phalangists. While he was there making a speech, a heckler stood up and started screaming at Franco, "You traitor." And his issue was the growing power of Opus Dei. There were left-wing, unreligious people who, resented the influence of the church. They had 3 members now in Franco's cabinet: commerce, finance, and the guy who was the helper of the prime minister. So because they saved Franco so much money, they got more and more power. And Franco had this Catholic vision for the country. That's a quote. But in the shuffle, what happened was the Phalange, the paramilitary guys, lost power. And Escrivá, Mr. Holy, rubbed it in. He was really nasty about it. Now, this guy, can we talk about personality disorders? Now he declared, because I am so important, people must kneel in front of me when they come and talk to me. This is Escrivá, this priest who started Opus Dei. All the Opus Dei ministers had to meet his rivals in Spain. So if he went out of Spain, which he did often because he's spending all his time in Rome, and then he would travel around to recruit. Every time he came back into the country, and it didn't matter where his plane landed or if he arrived in a train, all these top ministers had to drop their government work and greet his arrival, which was very difficult. These were in the days before easy transportation. For sometimes it was like a 5-hour drive one way to get there. And it showed, though, for everybody, Escrivá proved his power and the ministers showed their loyalty. It showed how they prioritized Escrivá's authority over even the government authority. In October of 1960, he did a triumphant homecoming tour. I don't know where he went, but he came back and he went through Madrid and he went through Saragossa and he went through Navarre with Luis by his side. And he was very conspicuous on all the podiums because he was the only one in a suit. He was the only one not a clergyman. Escrivá called him my banker. Luis had been clever, and he knew that he was inexperienced. He was young when he started doing this, and he knew he didn't know very much about money. And so he kept quiet at meetings when there were a lot of older, established financial people there. He didn't say a lot because he was afraid of what he would say would make him look stupid. Ordinary non-Opus Dei members found him really strange. I mean, this guy was, a zealot. He would, at meetings, business meetings, he would advise, have blind faith. In banking circumstances, this was not an accepted business strategy. Luis used blind faith to distract from the ways that Opus Dei had publicly changed conventional banking functions to benefit Opus Dei. They would do things that were unorthodox, and when non-Opus Dei bank heads would complain, he would say, "Oh, have blind faith. We know what we're doing." These support companies became clients, for example, at very favorable terms. And other people would say, "Well, how come, why are you favoring them?" "Oh, have faith. This is a wise decision." They pulled out of long-term relationship for example, with Morocco, because Morocco was predominantly Islamic and not interested in Opus Dei. They couldn't get their foothold, they couldn't get control, so they just removed their banking from Morocco. They expanded their business into European countries and in South America. They were more open to the whole Opus Dei shtick. Numeraries were in charge of bank overseas appointments. Opus Dei got their salaries. They got their own people on the boards and in charge. They would get a critical role in new bank business in those countries. The bank fueled Opus Dei's rise, which basically eventually ended up, this rivalry with the Phalange, this sort of jealous situation for power between Phalange and Opus Dei for Franco's approval. The Phalange started a campaign to expose this money network that was being created. Phalange distributed pamphlets on the street about the Opus Dei and government relationship, which they thought was bad, and they began to name the businesses that were involved. They were calling out the participants for the first time. They said, "Did you know that Opus Dei is absolutely bound up and embedded in Spanish daily life? 8 newspapers and magazines, a newswire, a publishing company, 50 bookshops, a film distributor, a movie rental chain, all linked to Opus Dei. And also the majority stake in Banco Popular." And they made this known by publicly distributing these pamphlets for 2 years. In June 8th of 1962, 2 bombs went off in the Banco headquarters. There were no injuries, but it was a message. This was a bitter fight now between the Phalange and Opus Dei. But this cult of personality was intense. It intensified again, and Escrivá put pressure on, continuing and growing pressure on his members everywhere. More money, more money, more money. He tortured them to constantly be bringing in money. He was secretly updated on all these businesses and expansions with secret reports sent to Rome. And as you know, they didn't phone, they didn't write, they hand delivered these messages, typed, so nobody would know who was involved. He flew into rages if he didn't get enough money. If the recruits didn't come or the extra money didn't come, he would have huge fits, hissy fits. He sent angry messages and orders back to Spain, and now he was using secret code. So we have grandiosity, we have uncontrolled avarice, and now we have paranoia. The members were encouraged to abuse their work position. Now, keep in mind, this is a religious organization dedicated to the work of God, now encouraging its members to abuse their position at work for the benefit of the group, to betray family and friends, and to act against their conscience. Even if you think it's bad, do it anyway for the group. They wanted to make a list of people that they could swindle. They asked all of their people in situations of any kind of power, make a list of who you could swindle. And they even ordered government ministers to break the government rules, and they did. Luis was an important liaison between Rome and Madrid. He was Escrivá's eyes and ears in Madrid. His association with López Rodo, the deputy prime minister, it whet his appetite for politics. He thought, oh, I kind of like this. But he couldn't leave the bank. He idolized JFK. I thought that was interesting. He was inexperienced. He had trouble handling day-to-day problems. And he had this job. His real job was to report back to Escrivá. But his 9-to-5 job was to help run this bank, and he had no idea how to do it. He had no experience. In 5 years, eventually, they reached crisis point. Luis had bled the bank dry for Opus Dei and its reckless expansion. the regulators came in, you know, the government bank regulators, and they pressured the bank to get money from the shareholders to bolster the coffers of the bank. Luis had to get money from Opus Dei. It's this circle, it's insane. So he borrowed money from the bank to pay Opus Dei's share to the bank. And this is just hugely unethical and very poor decision making. He still needed more money, and he had to go and ask his family for money, and they bailed out Opus Dei. He had a breakdown and he went off for a rest. And interestingly enough, it was very common in the echelons of Opus Dei everywhere for people to need what they called medical retreats. Very common, kind of a nervous breakdown situation. And there was a widespread prescriptions given for this situation too. Escrivá expressed insincere concern. He said, "Luis, we suffer for the Lord." Right, Luis? And he kept the money pressure up. He didn't let off of Luis. He kept it up. By the 60s, the Opus Dei group was in Africa, Japan, Australia. I mean, it was just letting off tentacles everywhere, expanding its reach and its numbers. And what grew with that? Escrivá's ego, his narcissism. He began combining his first and middle names, Jose and then Maria. And he did this because Jose is Joseph, and there were already a couple of Saint Josephs that were very popular, especially in Spain. And he wanted an exclusive name for when he became a saint. I'm not making this up. So there was no Saint Jose Maria, all one name. So he had a following, and he had, you know, to collect. He had people that he told, collect anything that has to do with me. So papers or the cup I drank out of, just start collecting things having anything to do with my life, artifacts, relics, because he was planning on that. He advised his close followers, like Luis, to distance themselves, to protect themselves from what they did for Opus Dei. Do it. It's bad. We know it's bad. Do it anyway, but be sure to protect yourself. And he created a situation of deniability for Opus Dei. I don't know how that worked, but if anything went wrong, there was some distance between him and these people, and between them and what they did evil for Opus Dei. By the mid-60s, there were 138 support companies. 25% of Franco's regime were Opus Dei members, and they generated huge sums of money. This guy was like a walking ATM. It was unbelievable. He had a complex system of bank accounts held in the names of numeraries to avoid government rules about an organization like Opus Dei having too much money. It was divided, and these numeraries, they were all in with him. They did it willingly. Members often were coerced into carrying money belts across borders out of Spain, which was punishable with prison. So he would have them go from Spain to Andorra to France to Italy, sometimes from Spain to Andorra to France back into Spain, sort of sneaking money around, money laundering, money trafficking. It was very weird. Many top Opus Dei members were frequent smugglers, and they would sometimes put money to be smuggled into the luggage of other members who didn't know it. They didn't realize that's what they were doing. Ortega Pardo, who was 43 years old, and a member of Opus Dei, who had taken vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience was living the wild life. And he flew to Caracas, Venezuela. He often patronized hotspots, clubs, nightclubs back home, but he had more freedom in Venezuela. He was considered debonair. There are many, many rumors about it. He liked the good life. He once told people, I mean, here's how demento all these guys were. He once passed himself off as the Archduke of Austria. He paid an orchestra at a nightclub to dedicate a waltz to himself. He paid them $1,000 to do that, in their money converted. Many of the elite numeraries like him led a double life. They had privilege. They got away with it because they contributed more money. So they took vows to the rules. Life in the residence halls was strict. But if you remember from the earlier video that we made, Luis, was watching movies and reading books that were forbidden and doing whatever he wanted. And a lot of them were. Many were cracking under the pressure too, as I said, medical retreats. Ortega was having trouble. He took a suitcase full of cash to a bank in Caracas. The cops got wind of it, and they didn't know, that it was for Opus Dei. They thought he was a communist, and they followed him and they arrested him, and they found $250,000 and antique jewelry, both in his hotel. He lied. He told them, I'm a university professor and that money is to buy property. And he did not mention anything about Opus Dei. They had given him, Opus Dei had sent him with the money. What he was really there to do was to open a boys' school in Caracas. The cops let him go because he had no connection to communists. So the guy's a businessman. There was panic in Madrid when they heard about this. Franco found out. That's why they were nervous. Franco found out. There was a real risk now that there was going to be an exposure of this river of money that was going back and forth from the bank to Opus Dei, from businesses to the bank to Opus Dei, who owned the businesses. Crazy. Luis was especially devastated by this because Ortega was an old friend. And, Luis could be corrupt, but not as good friends. And he had entrusted him with the money to go to Caracas. And Luis feared the loss of Opus Dei because of this scandal. Opus Dei was his life. It was the only thing he had going on. But they tried to cover up the whole thing. They hinted that Ortega had left Opus Dei, that he had left right before he went to Caracas. This was like his freedom trip to Caracas, and that he had resigned from all the companies that he was working with. This isn't true at all. Every numerary had to sign several. This is unreal. If you were a member of Opus Dei and you were important and you were going on a trip, you had to sign a number of blank sheets of paper with your name at the bottom so that they could forge things if they needed to, if you didn't behave yourself while you were gone. So they had a letter that they faked from him. They also started a rumor that he was not stable, that he was crazy. They put him in an asylum, and the doctors weren't able to find anything wrong with him, and they let him go. So then Opus Dei took him to an Opus Dei ranch in the country, trying to decide what to do about him. Scandal grew, and there were rumors of millions of dollars being smuggled, which were true. They weren't just rumors. The Vatican investigative journalists showed up. This is a problem. Okay. So Luis and his one of his associates, they talked about the option of a possible. Now they're talking about Ortega, an incapacitation or subjecting him to medical treatment proportionate to the danger he poses. And on the same day that he said that, Luis went to Franco's security chief to thank him for his assistance in the matter. Do you see what they're planning here? This is beyond the pale. So while this was going on, the whole membership of Opus Dei was freaking out. And they had Opus Dei doctors who had to go around and medicate anybody who was doubting and questioning. Luis never visited his friend Ortega. They disappeared him to Argentina. And Luis, he was deeply wounded by this whole situation, the betrayal of his friend, how his friend betrayed him. Escrivá told him, "Don't be upset. Everything can be fixed except death." Another little quote here. Sorry. "Don't be upset," he told Luis. "Everything can be fixed apart from death. Everything. Sometimes we only see one part of the whole. Never judge things by appearances. Many people who we are quite clearly witness doing bad things, we will see once again in heaven." Opus Dei is not a thing of this world. So, he was becoming omnipotent, is what Escrivá felt. He was omnipotent. His self-importance grew because he was taking orders from God and working for God with an insatiable ambition. Now we're on chapter 5, called Because I Said So. Rome, October of 1965. But first, in the early 50s, Maria Tapia was recruited by her boss at the Research Council in Madrid to be an Opus Dei numerary. She eventually lived at the Via Tavere, that's where Escrivá lived, where he expanded the complex. But then she was sent to Venezuela and was there for a long time, really established there. Then she got called back to Rome. She was shocked when she came back at all the remodeling that had been done at the villa and all the new rules for women over 40. Remember how strict they were? They had to lie on a wood plank and all this stuff. They now were allowed to have mattresses and hot showers. And this came as a financial decision because they started having so many medical bills from women who had bad health from the conditions being so arduous. They were suffering from the bad treatment. So they changed the rules. She was summoned by Escrivá in to his very opulent Villa Vecchia, the old villa, another big building on the complex. Of course, she had to greet him on her knees. She had to kiss his hand. She was surprised that he didn't know. She talked to him. She mentioned some things, and he didn't know who she was talking about. When she mentioned the woman who was in charge in Venezuela, she had been newly diagnosed with cancer. He knew nothing about it. This is like his person in Venezuela, an important person in the government of Opus Dei. He just was detached emotionally. What does that sound like? So they had sent regular reports about her and her health to him. He didn't seem to care. He didn't really remember, and he didn't seem to care. I says, "Oh, this is not bad news. Soon she will see God." So Tapia left the meeting knowing nothing about why she had been called back to Rome. She was very confused. But he seemed off. He seemed annoyed to her. So she wrote it off as worry about the upcoming Second Vatican Council. This was the first ecumenical council in 100 years. Pope John XXIII wanted to modernize the church because of the challenges of increasingly secular societies. John XXIII said they should open the windows and throw the windows of the church open and let fresh air come in. He was more progressive that way. He wasn't progressive, but he was more progressive that way. This created gigantic debates in the hierarchy of the church. There were many meetings. Opus Dei was fussed. Escrivá got shut out of decision making and the council council itself. He thought he should be there, you know. He was mad that 2 Peruvian bishops got to join, but Opus Dei was not included, and he certainly wasn't. He held a grudge that more secular institutions were created, and he felt that it lowered Opus Dei's status. Now, I didn't really understand the ins and outs of what was going on there. Essentially, the church has this weird hierarchy. It's complex, and there are certain classifications of organizations within the church. You know, there are the orders of religious members, the Franciscans, the Jesuits, the Benedictines, the Augustines, all those guys. Then there are some lay groups, you know, people who are not clergy, those groups. And I didn't really understand or even bother to try to figure out the complexities of the hierarchy. Suffice it to say, he felt slighted because Opus Dei did not get the regard he felt it was due. He told members of Opus Dei, other religious people, that, you know, we're not a secular institution. They don't know, they don't understand, right? The Vatican. He told them, we're taking on a less secular, more important position and title in the church. He didn't have the right to do that, but that's what he was telling everybody and acting like. Only the Vatican could do that. So he overstepped his bounds. He didn't like John the 23rd. He thought he was too liberal. But John the 23rd died in 1963, and in came Pope Paul VI, who had been the Bishop of Milan, and they'd fought when he was the Bishop of Milan. Paul VI didn't like Escrivá, vice versa. Escrivá flew into a rage when Paul VI was named. He called him a Mason, like, you know, the Masons, you know, and all who elected him will go to hell. That's a quote. Other higher-ups in the Vatican looked down on Escrivá. They thought he was a poseur. They called his book a handbook for senior scouts. Opus Dei was purchasing spirituality. And this is a contradiction. You know, this is not what, so they claim they wanted to do. Tapia, the woman who came from Venezuela, had nothing to do while she was hanging around the first 3 days she was there. So she asked somebody, I need a job. And they told her, catalog the library. Now, this would take months to do. So she knew that she'd been given menial jobs. This was a menial job, and she knew that this was done often to test members and also to assert control. Escrivá was into mind games. Numerary in London, who was a big shot academic, was ordered to come to Rome to be a priest. He had no vocation. He didn't want to be a priest. He was some professor guy, but he did what he was told. He got there, and when he got there, he was told to clean out some big gigantic old boiler thing, and he was told, and this is really disturbing, that like a bull in a bullfight who was weakened and controlled before being killed, uncritical obedience and the annihilation of personal feelings were tested and paramount for the institution of Opus Dei. If you were going to belong, you had to demonstrate this. Tapia, the woman, she began to think that something she did in Venezuela had gotten her into trouble, and she didn't know what it was. After a month, she was told, you're never going back to Venezuela. So when she protested, he raged at her. He says, if you're not going back because I said so. That's the title of this chapter. And he says to her, such arrogance. She was given a formal admonition for disagreeing with him. You're not going back because your work has been about you. Next time you do that, you're on the street. So now she knows, okay, she's done something challenging his authority. She didn't know what. It turns out that she had dared to question his rules and suggested that a member confess to an outside priest. And she also was required after this to take a month off in the country to one of the medical retreats. In Venezuela. And so being told take a month off, go to the country, there was no countryside there. So she went to the beach. She got in trouble for that. She had suggested that the magazine that he was putting out might not be of interest to a lot of people, secular people in Venezuela. That got her in trouble. And she was banned from communicating with anybody in Venezuela. Now, she'd been there for a long time and she had close friends there. So this was a real blow. Anybody who came to visit her, that person was told she was sick and could not take visitors. She was told only through prayer and blind obedience will you be able to save your soul. So for 4 months, she was a prisoner at the revelatory. She couldn't leave. She couldn't have phone calls. She couldn't have visitors. She couldn't have letters. She couldn't talk because he had bugged the entire place with listening devices in all the private rooms everywhere. He was surrounded by sycophants and who thought it was okay to breach people's personal rights. Another woman from Venezuela was in there and knew her and helped Tapia set up a post office box to be able to clandestinely send letters back and forth from Venezuela. Escrivá found out. He called her a hypocrite, a deceiver, and a wicked woman. He ordered the women who helped her to be beaten naked. This is what he said, and he's a priest, right? I wrote in the margins. This is sadistic. So I'm keeping my little hair checklist of psychopathology in my mind here. We're malignant narcissism, grandiosity, pathological lying, criminally versatile. Did I say grandiosity? Paranoid, happy to manipulate people, sadistic tendencies to paraphilia. He called Maria a wicked, ruined piece of trash. She was put through major interrogations. I don't like to think about that. Her rooms were searched. She was told to leave. She was forced to write a fake letter of resignation. She was warned not to talk about any of this or, quote, I will publicly disgrace you to men and your family. His ego was enormous because Opus Dei was now in 31 countries. Thanks to his business empire, he had spent the equivalent in 2026 money, he had spent $30 million on expansion. He spent so much money on expansion to the United States that the Catholic Church in the United States was starting to get worried. In 1964, the Archbishop of Boston, Richard Cushing, was concerned about a real estate purchase that Opus Dei made. Cushing appealed to ordinary people. The people in his diocese really liked him because he was just kind of an ordinary guy. He was a successful fundraiser because people liked him. He was very close to the Kennedys. He married JFK and Jackie. He baptized Robert Kennedy Sr.'s first, his son Christopher. I don't know if that was his first. Cushing prayed at the 61 inauguration. He made the prayer, and he also did JFK's funeral. He was disturbed that Opus Dei bought an acre of land near Harvard to build an Opus Dei residence for 200 students. He said, I don't know anything about your work, and you're supposed to go through channels. You're not supposed to just show up and call yourself the Catholic organization. You have to be okayed. There was a process. He accused Opus Dei of having too many tax-exempt real estate buys, and said you were running too many residences. You know, what's going on here? I mean, I think he saw there was something financial going on. Plus, he was bypassed. He's an archbishop. He's got a bit of an ego, too. So Cushing didn't trust Opus Dei's motives. He told them, no more expansion, and you have to give me detailed reports on your properties and on your money. But the situation in Boston, this was just the tip of the iceberg. Opus Dei had tons of property in Maryland and in the Midwest, bought by big Opus Dei companies, their support groups, and it seemed to have an endless stream of cash. There were rumors about money smuggling. The FBI was tipped off about it, about the corrupt deals. There was one big corrupt deal. This sounds funny and it's really complex. And so I'll just tell you, there was a corrupt deal about salad oil in Europe that Opus Dei was into. They got a bank loan by claiming the ownership of millions of dollars of oil, but it turned out that what they presented as vats of oil was vats of water. And a guy in New Jersey got arrested for it, and he blamed Opus Dei for stealing his business and threatening him. So this is really a visible sign of the erosion of Opus Dei's morality as it grew in power. They started slowly in 1949 in Chicago, in the United States. They set up a residence with a slow trickle of recruits, with local fundraising. They expanded. They went to Boston. There was a lot of generosity on the part of the population. They got big support from the daughter of a judge. She was really this rich woman, and she later became a vocal opponent of desegregation. So it gives you a little taste of what they were really like. Escrivá sent the only native English-speaking person in Opus Dei to Boston. So now remember, early on here, they were Spanish. They were European, but they were from not so much England. They were not from English-speaking countries. And so he wanted somebody in Opus Dei in Boston who could talk to people in their own tongue. He groomed Bishop Cushing and got his tentacles into Harvard. And slowly but surely, Opus Dei became the biggest, Opus Dei in Boston became the biggest stronghold of Opus Dei outside of Spain, and the United States became extremely important outside of Spain to Opus Dei, to our detriment, which we will find out as we move along. Okay, I'm going to stop here. This is the end of video number 3. This is a long chapter. So this is the end of video 3, and we will start with number 4 here soon. It's quite a tale of corruption and evil and psychopathology. They're still around. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're finding this as kind of intriguing in its horribleness as I have. Slán go fóill, slán.